And there were a lot of girls. Are there a lot of girls now? There were a lot of girls. I mean, grooms, hot walkers. I was an exercise rider. And so in the late 70s, there were still all the old timers were around. Like Jerkins, that whole era.
Mm-hmm.
And it was all, there weren't any Spanish. It was all the old black guys, like from Kentucky and stuff. It was really old school.
In South Carolina.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I worked in Camden for one winter. So it's really, you see it change over the years. And back then, no one had days off.
Mm-hmm.
But we liked it. And if the barn was big, if the stable was big enough, but remember, the stable might have only been 20 horses. That was a big stable back then. It was all spread out. It's not like it is today. One trainer that has 500 horses, he has those, that would have had 30 other trainers. So, and if the stable was big enough, they would have a swing groom. You know what that is, a swing groom?
Mm-hmm.
And how many horses do they rub now? 4? 3. Each groom had 3 horses that he rubbed, and there was a swing groom. So each groom would get a day off, and the swing groom, if it was this guy's day off, the swing groom would rub his 3 horses, and the next day he'd rub the next person's days off. So all the grooms got days off because they worked all day. Exercise riders just work in the morning, so what do they need a day off for, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were fine with that, you know. Hot walkers, same thing. You know, they don't really need a day off. I don't know what it's like now with the labor laws. Not labor laws, but the labor board determines you can only work so many hours for your salary, and then overtime kicks in. That wasn't, we never heard of such a thing.
What was your favorite horse to exercise?
I fell in love with a horse named Fugie, F-U-G-I-E. It was a Steinbrenner horse. I worked for Butch Lenzini, and he was my favorite horse to get on. I would be on him, and if you scratch his withers, he would, you know, like do that. And he ended up having a track record. He was claimed from Lenzini. I think Pete Ferriola had him. And I think if you talk to Nicky Santagata, who used to ride races, he was a jockey. He's the all-time winning rider at Meadowlands. That's what Harry Rice said the other day. But Nicky used to get on him. He said he was really tough. Like he'd gallop with his head all the way down, and he would almost hit himself with his knee. Like he'd come back and he'd be bloodied from him, you know, he was just, that was his action. But it was a Steinbrenner gelding. Steinbrenner had nice horses.
Hey, do you remember some of the names of the grooms and hot walkers from back then?
You know, some of the old black guys, like there was a Booker T. I don't know, we called him Booker T. Washington. These guys worked for Tom Waller, because Tom Waller, I think, was South Carolina, and he had he had Tanracken Farm. He had a bunch of nice New York breds. And because that was my first galloping job, I think. My first job on the track was rubbing horses, and I worked for Tommy Root Sr. So there were 2, Tommy Root, R-O-O-T, Root, because I'm from the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
Tommy Root Sr. and Tommy Root Jr. I can't remember now, it's been so long. I used to know all of them.
And where are you from in the Midwest?
Iowa.
Iowa. And
Yeah.
how'd you get into the horses?
I read a book. I'm a voracious reader, always have. I read a book called Come On Seabiscuit by Ralph Moody, before anyone knew who Seabiscuit was. I read it probably, it was a Weekly Readers, because I belonged to the Weekly Readers book club, and I was hooked. I read that book I read it 33 times. I kept it marked on the inside. I would just read it over and over and over. So I fell in love with it, how racing was back in the 30s.